It's Joshua Tiemann's double feature here. Joshua Tiemann's asks, is it naive or noble to want to make your friends into friends from a foreign... I think we must have gotten it a little backwards. To make your friends into enemies from a foreign policy standpoint. It's probably naive and noble, but it's achievable at a high cost. And the way you achieve making your enemies into friends is to use the formula that's only been tried once in history that I'm aware of. I'm sure it's actually been done earlier, come to think of it, but the only one I'm aware of is the United States after World War II. If you've got somebody who really wants you dead, then you've got what is often called the fire breathers. In Japan, they were there were the really, really radical militarists who were utterly convinced that Japan was the master race, and same thing with the Nazis. And every time you start talking about master races, you start coming back to that insecurity issue again. Well, who are you really trying to prove something to here? But in any event, you get these people who are screaming for war and ginning up the entire population for war. And certainly you see these in the Islamicist movement. All these guys in the streets with their fists in the air, and they got their ski masks on, and they're getting ready to kill everybody. Those are the people who are the problem, and those are people that you have to kill. They just have to be killed. You have to kill them in combat, and you got to get them, and you got to get almost all of them. And then, unfortunately, if this is a real serious clash of civilizations, kind of total war sort of thing, in order to turn enemies into friends, you have to do two things in sequence, and you got to get the sequence right. First of all, you have to utterly defeat them. You have to kill their fire breathers, and then you have to basically get to a position where the population has decided that they would rather surrender and have peace than another day of this. And since democracy has never once in history declared war on another democracy, it's always the fascist dictators that do this. Because these people are controlled by fear and intimidation, they've been told the entire time, in order to get them to fight, that we, the Americans or whoever, are baby-eating murder rapists who are going to come in there, and if they surrender, boy, it's just a matter of time before the Americans set fire to their children in front of their eyes, and this and that and so on. And that's what the Germans were told about the Americans, what the Japanese were told about the Americans. So the two-part alchemy to turn mortal enemies into lifelong friends is you have to beat them so severely in war, you have to defeat them so severely, that they're actually ready for you to come in and basically be this horrific occupying army, because another day of this kind of war is just not tolerable. And then, when you show up with Hershey bars instead of crowbars, you accomplish something in the human spirit that is very, very profound. You make people realize that they were wrong to fight this war. And I think that you can certainly make that case for Germany and Japan both, that if you ask a modern Japanese or a modern German, certainly those who lived through the war, I think both of them, needless to say, with many exceptions, but the bulk of both of those people, both of the Japanese and Germans who are still alive from the war years, would agree that it was best for them, forget about what's best for us, that it was best for Germany and best for Japan that they lost that war, that America won the war. There's no question that Germany and Japan are two of the most prosperous, decent, reliable, certainly they're two of the best allies we have. And they're both extremely pacifistic countries. How did the two most warlike countries on the planet, in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, go to being the most pacifistic countries in the world? Because we killed all their fire eaters and we hurt them real bad. And then instead of coming in and setting up an occupation that generated more and more and more generations of rebellion, we came in and actually helped them build their country back. Brent Cates just said, we acted like Americans. That's it. I couldn't have put it better if I had 100 years to think it over. That's precisely what we did. We acted like Americans. And this isn't just a modern, recent thing. U.S. Grant had a statement I thought so profound and so indicative of the kind of man that Ulysses S. Grant was. He was called a savage and a bull and a bloodthirsty murderer who just threw troops into battle and didn't give a damn about anybody. But of all the things that U.S. Grant said, he was a great, great man as a general, not a great president, a great man. U.S. Grant said many profound things, and one of the most profound things was he said, if we have to fight, I'd like to just fight, get it over with so that we can be friends. And it's really true. It's this understanding that, okay, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, let's get it over with. And I think the one thing you don't do is you don't leave somebody half defeated, because then the fire eaters just reinfect the population, and that animosity builds up, and the population is never convinced they're beaten, and there you go. The Confederacy was beaten. The Confederacy was beaten. You don't have to like the outcome, but they knew that they were beaten. Classic line about that, by the way, was not long after the war, a year or two after the war ended, Joseph Johnson, he's kind of an unknown general, really. He ran the Western Campaign for a fair amount of the war, and Robert E. Lee got a lot of the glory, but Joe Johnson did a lot of the fighting. And Joe Johnson was on a steamship 3 or 4 or 5 years after the Civil War had ended. And he was on a rail on this steamship with one of these young guys, Shelby Foote, the kind of guy who's always talking a big talk, but was never actually in the battle when the bullets were flying. And it was 3 or 4 years after the war, and this young man was talking about how the Confederacy is going to do it again, and blah blah blah, and that the Confederacy was never really defeated. The Confederacy was never really defeated. And Joseph Johnson turned to this guy and he said, "Well, sir, you may not have been defeated, but I was." And that's from a man who fought he was the last major army to surrender. I guess Kirby Smith was the last general to surrender, but Joe Johnson surrendered after after Lee. So, he knew he was beaten, and once he knew he was beaten, then you could be friends. And this is what happened to Germany. But if you don't finish them, if you don't finish the fire eaters, if you don't finish the warmongers in that society, then you're going to have to go back. And we're learning this right now in Iraq, aren't we? And we learned it in Korea, who we never defeated. We just had a ceasefire. The Germans in World War I, probably the classic example, they were beaten on the battlefield, but the people at home didn't feel defeated. So Hitler was able to drum up all of this, nonsense about how they were stabbed in the back by the Jews, or they were stabbed in the back by this. And the military was defeated. Ludendorff had 3 big offensives, the big Operation Michael offensives in 1918, and they failed. And the Germans lost the war on the battlefield. But before the battle was really brought home to the German people, the armistice was signed. So the German people just never felt it was easy to convince them that they didn't really lose because they didn't want to admit that they lost. Wasn't brought home. So you have an armistice, and then guys like Adolf Hitler are just sitting there stewing. And so, as I said, the equation is you have to actually defeat them, kill their fire breathers, and make the population realize we've had enough. And then you help them to your feet. Then you show them kindness. You defeat them, then you show them kindness. What we do in Iraq and what happened after the Treaty of Versailles is you don't defeat them, and then in Versailles, you not only don't defeat them completely, but then you're actually cruel to them. That's not going to do it. That's going to get you another war. And sure enough, you did.